Hello, everyone. This is Matt Harpold, Account Manager with Web Courseworks. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. We have reached the half-hour mark, and we'll be getting started with today's webinar. First, we would like to recognize our sponsors and our partnership with .org Community. .org Community connects association executives and industry partners through online discussion forums, programs, and webinars. We encourage you to subscribe to .org Community for even more online and live education programming and fulfill your annual CAE requirement in one place. We'd also like to recognize the upcoming event with ASAE annual meeting. Web Courseworks will be at booth 1906. Feel free to schedule a demo, stop by, and enter an opportunity to win a Spark drone. We also have an upcoming webinar for professional development for L&D professionals. This will be Tuesday, July 30th at 11:30 a.m. We'll have guest speaker David Kelly, the Executive Vice President and Executive Director of the eLearning Guild. I'd like to introduce Andy Hicken, Director of Quality and Strategy, who will introduce today's webinar and speaker. Andy, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Hold on, I'm adjusting my mic. Thanks, Matt. So I'm a speaker, and so is Joh Leh, who we're very happy to have here today. Joh Leh is CEO and Lead Analyst at Talented Learning. Named among the top 20 global e-learning movers and shakers in 2018 and 2017, Joh is a fiercely independent LMS selection consultant, blogger, and podcaster who helps organizations select and implement learning technology strategies, primarily for extended enterprise applications. His advice is based on more than 20 years of industry experience, serving as a trusted LMS selection and sales advisor to more than 100 learning organizations with a total technology spend of more than $65 million. So Joh, welcome. We're really happy to have you here with all your experience in this field.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and the way this is going to work, we're going to go through our hype curve, which is something that we've been doing for years now. We recently implemented a new way of gathering the data for the hype curve from Twitter, and we're going to give you recent results of data we've pulled in through that method. So I'll talk about just what we mean by a hype curve, our methodology, and then we'll talk about the four categories of the hype curve: the innovation trigger, the peak of inflated expectations, trough of disillusionment, and the slope of enlightenment. And basically, John's going to, I'll talk about the data we're seeing, and then Joh will talk about his experience with use cases of the various trends and technologies that are showing up on our hype curve. So here's an introduction to the hype curve. It was coined by the technology consultancy Gartner. I think they meant it to be sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I think they really tapped into something that's true, which is that when a new innovation comes along, you have this fast rise in expectations, and that basically corresponds to a lot of hype out there in social media, at conferences, any place people are talking about their professional uses of technology. So they say, like, in the early days, you're at the innovation trigger. Very few people know about this new technology. And then people start getting excited about it, thinking about ways it could be used. And a lot of inflated expectations get attached to the technology. And then, so you could think of like the early days of social media, how people thought it was going to bring, world peace and I don't know, lots of other great things. And then gradually people start to realize that technology isn't going to do that for them. And you get to a trough of disillusionment where a lot of people feel disillusioned, unhappy with the results of the technology. But during this time, some people are learning to use the technology. It starts to go into application. And that's the slope of enlightenment, where people figure out that the technology might not be the cure-all that it was thought to be at the peak of inflated expectations, but it's something that they can still use that will solve problems in their lives. So that's the basic idea of the hype curve. The idea of our hype curve is to look at our little industry here of e-learning. We are an e-learning company, and look at the trends in our industry and place them on a hype curve. So this is the version that we published on our blog in January. So you can see, and we'll talk about all these technologies. So if you're not familiar with these, all of these come up in the rest of this presentation. But we had, in our innovation trigger, we had blockchain and learning analytics. Then getting to the peak hype, the peak of inflated expectation, virtual reality, learning experience, AI or artificial intelligence. Then moving down toward the trough of disillusionment, we had microlearning, gamification badges, MOOCs, and then some technologies that were moving on to the slope of enlightenment were mobile learning or M-learning and simulation. So we're basically going to update this. We've gathered 6 more months of data, and we'll share those updates today. I want to talk quickly about our methodology. So what we've done is we've identified a group of e-learning influencers and a group of general technology influencers, and we use Python code to hit the Twitter API, and you can basically pull down all of their tweets with code, with time code stamps and all exactly what they tweeted. Then we also look at the articles that they've shared. So that's what this step of scraping the page titles is. So if one of these influencers shares an article, our code goes and gets that web page's title. We throw all that into what we call the word bag, which is just a long list of all the words that were used, what time they were used by, who they were used by. And we use that to look at what words are being buzzed about most often. So if somebody uses microlearning a lot in, say, the month of December, that's going to show up in our hype curve. And then if people stop talking about microlearning so much in January, that'll show up in our hype curve as well. The final analysis, we use the R programming language for statistics to do that. So we then generate these plots. So this is what's coming out of the sort of final result of our analysis. And what these plots are showing you is change in use of a term over time. So for example, we just looking at the data recently, we saw that there was a lot of new use of this kind of new term. Design thinking seems to be trending upwards recently. So you've got time moving from left to right, and then on the vertical axis here, you've got the proportion of our influencers who used that word during a month. So like at the start of this, there's a little dot that is telling us that right about 13% of the influencers in our group used that term in December 2017. But if you look later on in the graph, this is a recent month, so this would be May, April, this would be February. That number bumped up to almost 20% use the term design thinking. So there's been a little bit of an uptick in that terminology. That's what those black dots are showing you. The blue line is called the line of best fit. That's basically fitting a linear regression model to this. It's just showing you the overall trend. So if it's going up, that means there's an increase in the use of that trend. And then the gray dashed line is a smoothed curve. So that's trying to show a more complex trend than the blue line is showing you. It is really influenced by what you call outliers. So if you look at this design thinking plot, you can see that almost nobody used this term last month, and that really pulled down the gray dashed line. So take the gray dashed line with a grain of salt, but it can show you a more complex trend than the blue line of best fit here. So we're basically going to go through all of these technologies and trends we're seeing in the last few months, and we're going to show you our plots for them. And then we've got some articles that have been widely shared about them that you can go on and read more about if you want to learn more about these trends. And also we'll be talking to John about how he's seen them used in his experience out there talking to hundreds of different clients about their use of e-learning technologies. So I'm going to start with the innovation trigger. So this is the left end of the hype curve. These are the terms that are not widely used. They're not at their peak of hype, but there's a clear upward trend. And the first one is that trend of design thinking. So you can see that it hasn't reached high level of hype. We're still only talking about maybe fewer than 20% of the influencers using it, but it is clearly increasing. When I saw this, it just kind of showed up in the data, and I really didn't know what was meant by design thinking. So I looked at the articles that people were sharing about it, and I thought this was a useful one from Clark Quinn, who's an influential guy in eLearning. On his blog, he has this article about what it is. It's basically a new way of thinking about user interface design, and more broadly than that, it's the idea of taking the approach of a designer to e-learning problems. So when you apply it to e-learning. So John, I don't know if you've kind of seen this come up. Have you heard people talking about design thinking, or can you kind of place it in the broader trends going on in e-learning?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I think where I see it the most is within the efforts of customer learning, or with e-commerce type learning, where you're onboarding learners into the environment. And so it's taking that design thinking, or that instructional design, and making it broader, at least my interpretation is broader than just the content, but really the whole experience, including the outreach, the marketing, the ongoing communication, and the ongoing learning nuggets to reinforce and allow that knowledge to stick over time. So I think it's a lot of what we've been talking about for the last 20 or 30 years in instructional design, but now the technology has really made it more encompassing than just the content piece itself.
Yeah, I agreed. And it's the idea you should be designing every aspect of your learners' engagement with what you have to offer. That's a great point about how this is something people have been talking about for decades. That's really true of a lot of these trends. Even something that's thought of as being a new, exciting technology like artificial intelligence, that buzzword has been around for decades. People have talked about artificial intelligence since like the 50s or 60s, but they become buzzwords when they start to be widely used with a fast growth in their usage that you can track over time among influencers. So something happens like the availability of new AI solutions, for example, that kind of drives them into the realm of our hype curve.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, another new one that I saw show up in our data was this term of learning culture, which is certainly makes sense. You can imagine people wanting to have a culture of learning at their organizations, at their association, or their company. But it's interesting that it's popping up more frequently over the last few months and has this clear upward trend. John, how have you seen, or how would you place this learning culture within our industry?
Well, I think for many years or even decades, learning management for employee type situations was really about compliance management, and it was less about the learner itself. It was more about having to complete the mandatory training requirements that required for your proprietary organization, or for regulatory reasons. But I think with the introduction of the web and social media, and now everybody having mobile devices, as well as the learning experience platforms in the industry that have such a focus on the learner, it's now building the learning culture is really the transformation of going from that compliance nuts and bolts to really using learning as a strategic competitive differentiator in your organization for any of your extended enterprise or employee learning groups. So once again, I think it's something that's been talked about for years, building that learning culture, but the tools are now enabling that daily, lifelong, relevant learning, and that's really is changing things now.
That's great. And I think you could connect this to the learning experience trend, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. I found this article by Tomas Chamorro from Music and Josh Bersin from the Harvard Business Review to be helpful. So again, these will be we'll share this presentation afterwards, and you can go check these things out. All of these articles were widely shared in the data that we got from Twitter. So these are the things that people are reading when they start to hype these new trends. All right. I'm moving into things that are getting a little bit, those first two trends were a little bit low in terms of their usage. Now we're starting to get to a couple of things that are starting to get toward our 25% threshold, which is when I consider things. If you've got at least 25% of the influencers talking about you consistently over the course of months, I'd say that seems to be the peak. So these are our terms that are starting to get up toward that level, but they're not yet there. So I was interested to see that this term workflow, also sometimes phrased as flow of work, was showing up often in our data. That wasn't something I'd really seen as obviously I know the word workflow, but it seems like we're seeing a lot of people talking about workflow learning. So an example would be this article by Pamela Hagel that was published in Learning Solutions. So she's talking here about workflow learning, which seems to be broadly the idea that you should be learning as part of your normal workflow, like during the tasks you do as part of your job. There should be learning opportunities attached there to that, which was, reminds me of performance support a little bit, which is something that's been used.
Thinking that.
Yeah, been used for decades, but I think it's a really interesting concept. John, what have you got to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's another one of these concepts been around for a while. Electronic performance support systems, I think was one of the first acronyms I learned in the industry, and it's still continued all the way to today. Do you provide the learning in anticipation of needing it, or do you provide it at the time of need? And I think once again, with the evolution of mobile devices and the ability to get small snippets of learning to people when they need it, that's actually feasible now. And so you're seeing a lot more of the trend go back to that workflow learning or having it available at the time of need. And that could be anything from QR codes on, for example, QR codes on machines or things that you have to fix that take you right to the appropriate learning. Or it could also mean the integration into broader ecosystems from a technical standpoint in organizations that support learning outside the traditional learning environments. So, from working out in the field to even on the factory floor, but ways that you can tie other systems in into that overall learning and performance workflow.
Yeah, I mean, I think of tying other systems into that learning and performance workflow. I think of the solutions that will put sort of little bits of micro learning into EHRs, electronic health record systems for doctors and other clinicians. Would probably be a good example of workflow learning. So, yeah, you can.
Another one might be notifications right into your Slack channel or Slack.
There you go. Yep,
you're taking that right into your daily life.
Yep, that'd be great. We do see. We talked about this before this. I do see Slack showing up here. I just didn't quite reach my my criteria of having a big upward slope, but yeah,
we only have 1 hour. We only have 1 hour.
Okay, yeah, let's. Okay, so analytics. So this is kind of a term. We also see learning analytics, data analytics, but just the general use of this buzzword, it's starting to be everywhere. It's really getting to the point where I might put it to the peak. My personal rule is that I have to see this line of best fit, this blue line, get over 0.25. So it's almost there. So maybe give it a couple more months and we'll put it in the peak category. But it's a very hyped word. It's getting to the top of the upward slope part of the trend. So I would imagine most of us have seen the word analytics used in our professional practice. John, you want to talk about some use cases where you see it out there?
Yep, the word analytics, is new, but the concept is old. Once again, and more frequently, people just use the term reporting. So, reporting in terms of learning technology has traditionally been around of who's taken what, when, or what their status is on any piece of content. I think what analytics means in the use cases is really building upon that to say, okay, what is this learning data and how does that relate to the business and impacts in the business? So very often the analytics component is joining the data with CRM data or point of sales data or sales and performance data or customer satisfaction data, and then drawing direct parallels to how an organization is moving the needle or not moving the needle in true business metrics broader than just learning.
Yeah, that is really true. What's often organizations are doing is taking the data coming from a bunch of different systems and putting it in a data warehouse, hiring a data team, maybe some data scientists, and doing analytics. I think what in the our association space, what's really been driving the buzz around analytics is the availability of some some cheaper solutions for doing analytics within your organization, and also solutions that are specialized to associations. So that's something that's been fairly new in the last few years, is these vendors who do analytics specifically for associations.
Mm-hmm. Well, that skill set is lacking in a lot of associations and organizations in general. Even if they have it, it's in such demand.
Yes,
it's hard to get it prioritized for training, and so I think that's why we see that evolution.
Yep. So if you just wanted sort of a general introduction, this article from McKinsey was widely shared among our influencers. So, okay, so we want to take a little break from cranking through this hype curve and ask our attendees, before we get to the peak hype trends, whether there are other emerging things out there that you'd like to see, you'd like to know, if we put it into our hype curve engine, whether they would show up as one of those emerging trends. Are there things you've heard of you'd be interested in seeing whether those should show up on the hype curve? And we also wanted to ask if the things we've talked about here, are you actively investigating any of those technologies, using any of them already? And you can do that just by typing your answer in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar interface, and then we'll see the results. It won't be shared with the others. It's not an official poll. It's a open.
Oh, I thought we were tweeting it out right away.
No, we're not as of yet. We'll work on that integration later. But yeah, if you have anything that you'd like to see, go ahead and type it in there to the question.
So how about blockchain? Is that something, boy, I see it on CNBC and the news every day, but I haven't heard it in my circles in learning and development. What do you think about that?
So I actually, we're going to get to that. I have that.
Sorry, jumping ahead.
It showed up as a growing trend back in December when we ran this, but it's been interesting. It's kind of it's dropped off recently, and I created a new category. So just hold on, we'll get to it for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, everyone. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. So a couple of things that come in. So Naveen says gamification. Sarah says badging. Yeah, those are definitely on the hype curve, and we're getting to both of those.
Great.
If you think of any others, we'll keep this open. So go ahead and type in anything else you see.
What I'd love to hear is terms that you've heard of and you don't know what they mean yet. Put those in there, because that's how it starts out.
Absolutely. Yep. Like a couple of these that just showed up in my hype curve, and I had to go research them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, we'll keep. You can answer that question anytime you want to. We'll come back to it, but I want to talk about. Let's get to the peak hype. So these are the words that are showing up most frequently in that data set that we're looking at. So the peak of inflated expectations. So yeah, no surprise, artificial intelligence, AI, is still at a very high hype level, just like it was back in December when we did this. So we're still showing an overall growth trend in these blue lines. You can sort of see, if you look at the individual dots, there's kind of a peak back a few months ago. So this would be around October, November, somewhere in there. And then things kind of dropped off a little bit. Maybe that was just the holidays. And then a few months ago, another high month for the usage of that term, and then dropped off a lot more. So if you look at the gray dashed line, it kind of looks like it's peaked in last fall and is kind of coming downhill. We don't know that for sure. It could be that next month, if we ran this, we'd see another really high peak for AI. But it kind of looks like maybe it's peaked. Still, though, it's still at a very high level of usage. This is over in several months, we had over 50% of our influencers sending out some kind of tweet that talked about AI or artificial intelligence. John,
I can't get by a day. Yeah, I can't get by a day without thinking about AI. That is in the forefront of discussions all the time. It's certainly from just a trying for organizations trying to figure out the best way to utilize it. But just to build on real quick, we talked about reporting, and then the next level of analytics is the combination of that reporting, learning reporting with other systems. And really AI is, think of that almost as the next layer on top of that yet to say, okay, what are the trends that we can find that we can't find as humans, like using programmatically to find data or find trends in all that data that we may not be aware of, and then being able to act on those trends. So that's seems to be one of the easiest low hanging fruits of AI inside the learning industry, is to lay that on top of the most sophisticated learning analytics. The second piece of that is learning recommendations on trying to get the right learner and think about how to create that culture of learning on that daily or even more than daily learning experience, but how to get the right content in front of the right person based on their profile, their likes, their needs, trends that they have with other learners inside your organization, much more than just metadata on their profile, but how they interact inside and outside the learning system or to your broader ecosystem. So those are the two places, and a lot of different organizations are trying to approach both the administrative side and from a reporting and from the learner side using AI as a differentiator.
Yeah. Do you think it's getting to the point where people are starting to get disillusioned, or do you think there's still a lot of excitement out there?
Yeah, I think you can't help but get disillusioned because it's so easy to talk about it and it's so easy to say that you have it, but it's awfully hard to prove it.
Right.
And so, I think there's a lot of disillusion around there because there's, just from a vendor standpoint, there's a lot of gray area to walk in when you're talking about AI, and I think that's what causes some of the disillusionment.
Yep. So I'd recommend looking into some of Donald Clark's blog posts about this. He's published a lot about AI recently. What I like about it is that he has real use cases. So this AI and assessment blog post, for example, is good for talking about ways that you could actually use AI in formative assessment. So things like, sort of letting the AI pinpoint a question from a question bank that could then be used to make learning recommendations like you were talking about, John. I know there are some spaced assessment solutions out there in continuing medical education to help people study for things like board certification exams that are widely used by doctors. So that's a good place to start if you're trying to kind of grasp what AI really is and how it could be used in our space. Okay, so I'm gonna keep moving since we got about 20 minutes left here. So learning experience is the next most hyped term we're seeing, and we're still seeing some pretty good growth in this term. John, what's a learning experience?
Well, everybody's heard, for decades how everybody hates their learning management system, and learning experience is really the answer to that. It was the refocusing of the whole experience to be on the learner, to focus on what they needed, how they could access content, how they could get that content in the workflow. A lot of the things that we were talking about, develop a learning culture, that daily learning. So it makes it so that your learning management system, or rather your learning environment, it's not so much one place to go to take formalized SCORM content, but rather a place that you can go to get drips of learning that's both formal, informal, from the internet, from your peers, all in a way that's relevant to you, and a lot of times using artificial intelligence to establish that relevance.
There you go.
And so very, very rarely now do you hear organizations saying they hate their learning system so much because the gap's been closed by now modernizing that the learning front end.
Yeah. So Josh Burson has certainly been a writer who's really, I think he may have coined the term of learning experience platform. So you can check out his writings on this. He's talked about some learning experience platforms are new platforms designed from the ground up to be LXPs. Some of them are evolved LMSs. But if you want to delve into it, he's a good place to start on that. So then virtual reality. So this is a term that maybe is like right at the peak. It's got some pretty high usage out there. It's not growing fast. So maybe it's sort of like right at the very top of the hype curve. Oh, I guess I got another Josh Bersin article in here. I thought this one was useful on virtual reality, uses of virtual reality in e-learning. John, are you seeing it out there, real use cases for virtual reality?
I've seen the same use cases for years in primarily aviation and military. Just recently, within the last week or two, I saw one of my first real commercial applications with an organization that makes equipment, aerial equipment, and it has to train operators both from a volunteer standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint. But these machines are pretty dangerous to use and to train on, and so they're realistically, using that in their daily lives now to train operators to do this, and tying that and integrating that in with learning management systems using XAPI as a way to pass that information back and store and capture it. So yeah, that's my first real commercial one, and I would expect there's going to be more coming along as the technology is becoming more affordable, and hopefully they'll shrink the size of that what you have to wear on your head.
Yep,
make it a little easier.
You'll see some example if you read this article. There's some examples using Google Glass or Google Cardboard. So yeah, this is, which would be augmented reality, which is often sort of mixed together with virtual reality when people talk about this trend. Yeah, it seems like it's useful right now in situations where to train on the real thing is extremely expensive or dangerous. Your flight simulators, the example you gave, John. So, but the price is obviously coming down. We might start to see more uses over time. So,
a little bit of medical too.
Yeah,
it is coming along in medical from a surgery standpoint would be the other application.
That's correct. Yeah, one of our clients has done a thing where they model a part of the body that surgery is done on, and they kind of allow doctors to explore that part of the body using VR technology. So, let us know in the questions panel if you've looked into or tried any of these technologies. We just have 3 right now that are kind of showing up at the peak of inflated expectations. So we've got AI, learning experience, or LX platforms, and then virtual reality. So let us know your experiences if you've had any. All right. So John, you asked about blockchain. So I created a new category. I'm calling them fizzlers. So these are tech trends that looked like they were growing really well like 6 months ago, and then they just kind of died out, and they've got decrease in use. So the first one is blockchain. So it was right around the end of last year. There was a lot of people in e-learning were talking about blockchain, and it seems like it didn't really go anywhere. So just to sort of explain what blockchain is, that's kind of the first challenge. Blockchain is the technology that's behind cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And basically it's a way of making sure that you can't counterfeit the currency or fake a transaction, essentially. So that's the real point of blockchain. It has clear applications when you talk about cryptocurrencies, about these commercial transactions. But some of the criticism of its hype in e-learning has been, is this really like a solution in search of a problem? Do we really have anything in e-learning where blockchain would make sense? This article by Mirjam Neelan sort of maps out a way that she imagines you might see blockchain used in our space. So for sort of making sure that somebody can't fake a certificate or degree, maybe you could use blockchain for that kind of thing, or the receipt of continuing education. I could certainly see blockchain used for that. I'm just going to move on quickly. Then the second one, GDPR. So that's the General Data Protection Regulation. It was promulgated by the European Union. The buzz was huge. It was mostly, really kind of on the techie side. People who develop software were saying, oh my goodness, we've got to come into compliance with this really stringent EU regulation. There was a deadline. The deadline has passed, and we've seen the hype drop off. So that's kind of, self-explanatory why that happened. But this is a good article about its application in e-learning. So those are our 2 fizzlers. I want to get to the trough of disillusionment. We've had a number of people, or a couple more people have asked us about badging. So like its usage. We just had a badging webinar last month, but which had some really good use cases for badging. But these are terms that were hyped a lot. They've now entered the time where people are starting to think like maybe they don't solve all the problems that they thought they solved. That doesn't mean that these are not useful concepts or that these don't solve problems for people. But they're just kind of like decreasing hype. So one where there's a really clear trend is microlearning. It was hyped, as much as artificial intelligence as of about 15 months ago. And then there's just been a real drop off in its use, a really clear downward trend. People talking about microlearning. So, John, does that match what you've seen? Have you seen sort of some disillusionment around this concept of microlearning?
I have. I did a webinar on it also a couple of years ago, and we've really struggled to collect case studies from that of inaction. But what I've been able to I basically put it into two categories. It's really useful when the certification or the badge or that piece of micro learning is relevant outside your organization. Mm-hmm. So if you're getting a certification, if you're getting something that verifies your skills that you can shop around to either get a new job or to get hired as a consultant or something like that, there's a lot of value in that, and a lot of extended enterprise organizations that are selling content will wrap it up in that. Where it's probably less useful, I think, for organizations or where they're struggling to find use is for employee populations, of how to do that in a relevant way that's different than just running a report on whether somebody has the training completed or not, versus just going through that whole having badge concept. And so where it really, I think, makes an impact is those organizations that are trying to change their learning culture and to have that activity, that daily activity reflected, from a social standpoint for other learners to be able to find out who the thought leaders are in an organization. But its applications need to be thoughtful, and it's not easy. Mm-hmm. In my opinion.
Yeah. So John, while we've been talking here, we've had a few more really interesting use cases come in from people attending the webinar. So I'm just going to read those out. These are not about microlearning, they're about other stuff. So Kate says she's used social media integration like tweet chats, chatbots to increase the work to experience integration in portfolio-based assessment. And then I'm not sure if this is if these are more ideas or if these are kind of tied to that, but you mentioned certificate passports, smart campus, soft skills training via voice and video analytics. Those are some really cool ideas. Yeah, maybe this is something we should, Kate, you might be talking here about things that are sort of on the innovation trigger phase, maybe some of these, like the voice and video analytics for soft skills training. So that'd be like being able to say, here, like a customer service representative, role playing a call or something like that, and having a technology that could actually do analytics on what they heard or was video recorded, and provides recommendations on more learning, or just lets them know how they did. That's a really cool new technology that is becoming more feasible. Wow. Yeah. And then
we'll see it on the chart next year.
Yeah. Naveen says she used, Naveen used virtual reality to showcase how the new drug travels through the body and its impact. New drug launch through a virtual reality nugget was appreciated by doctors and made it really easier for them to learn about the drug, its impact, et cetera. So a use of virtual reality there, again, in medical.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So like really Magic School Bus.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And then Kate adds, I looked at Eon virtual reality. So she's looked into virtual reality a little bit. She says it has education, medical, and great technical business design and marketing implication. And a company has been using VR for planning classroom layout and furniture. Oh, that's a really cool idea. Yeah, makes sense.
Great.
The Steam platform, so that's a gaming platform, is having a growing catalog of gamification of educational material. I did not know that. That's really cool. So Steam is like, used a lot by gamers these days for video gaming. So I didn't know about that educational use of it. At MMU,
Man, who's teaching who here,
yeah,
Andy?
well,
Who's
this is
teaching
great. This is
who
what a
here? We're
webinar
learning a
should
bunch
be,
of
right?
things we don't.
Yeah. And she says, at MMU, they developed therapies in VR to help build confidence in stroke patients to get used to their shift in depth perception. And some companies are developing
Wow.
care skills via highly emotive, immersive simulations, usually around dementia care. So yeah, that use of simulation for soft skills again. Like
Man, we've got some smart attendees here.
Yeah, no
This
kidding.
is great.
Right. So yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you for those contributions. Okay, so we had a couple questions about badges. So this is what we're seeing. This is in terms of the hype. We're seeing the hype. If we could go back before, we don't have data before December 2017, but I'm sure it was higher. In say 2015, 2016, I know that I saw a lot of hype around badges then. The hype has really died down. On the other hand, I'm seeing applications. So we're getting to that phase where people, it's not so much a marketing term as it's a technology that people are using. We happen to have one of John's articles that was widely shared on this. So John, you saw some use cases on badges. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and this still is the use case. The most practical use case is that there's a gap between formal education and the jobs that are needed actually out in the marketplace. And so lots of associations and really for-profit training companies are trying to bridge that skills gap that's out there through formal or certification or badging type programs. And some of them might be soft skills or basic business skills. It really varies from industry to industry. But associations are the ones that are really leading the charge by trying to make these certifications or micro learning credentials or whatever they choose to call them relevant outside their organization, like mentioned before.
I mean, I've always thought badges seem like a great solution for replacing the something that bedevils our industry, which is the PDF certificate for continuing education. So that's the idea that you complete some piece of continuing education, you then get a PDF that's unique to you, but is easily counterfeited, and more importantly, that you have to keep track of you as the learner. So, you're some type of professional, you're a doctor or you're a cable engineer or whatever, you have a certification, you have to collect these PDFs, and then every year you have to submit them to the body that certifies you. And that's putting a lot of administrative kind of bureaucratic work on the learner, on these busy, highly skilled professionals. Badges offer the promise that the learner no longer would have to keep track of those that evidence of their continuing education. They can just zap it from an LMS or whatever platform gives them the badge to the certifying body, and not have to worry about saving PDFs on their hard drive or having email attachments that they're downloading and then uploading into some other platform. So that's where I see badges gaining more usage. And we have some others, and that's why they're really important to associations, I think, because associations do a lot of continuing education for that certification purpose. That's really kind of the niche that a lot of associations are in, and we certainly see that with some of our clients using badges in that way. Okay, and then gamification. So this was also asked about by our attendees. Was certainly a really hyped term. We're seeing downward trending in the hype around the term. It's out there. It's in use. I know you see it, John. To me, it seems more of a right now more on the corporate side. John, I know you mentioned like extended enterprise. It's got some really important uses for gamification.
Yeah, when you think about gamification, think of it in two pieces. It's the gamification within the content, so the instructional design of engaging the learner through any particular piece of content, however that is. And then there's the gamification on the platform side, the LMS platform side, which is the awarding of things like points and badges and awards, and having things like leaderboards that show learners that interact the most or post the most social content or take the most content of the leaderboards. And then finally to the concept of issuing rewards, having contests and rewards. So, the first 10 people to finish the new product training, or the first channel partner to certify all of their service people on, the new software application that's coming out. Those are ways that you can use gamification to actually drive the speed of learning in a way that's fun and competitive. And so you see a lot of that in extended enterprise, of trying to get different channel partners to compete against each other. And the reward sometimes isn't just silly stuff. It can be like cards or pizza parties and things like that. But a lot of times, like in channel learning, they can go into the partner relationship management system there and say, okay, if the winners then will get an adjustment in their commission rate, for example, go from 3 to 5% for the next 90 days.
Yeah.
And so now the rewards are serious, and the gamification is serious.
Right.
It's no longer just fun, it's no longer just silly stuff.
Right. Yeah, I always thought, like, just the idea that you would level up for, completing a bunch of SCORM packages, like, who would be motivated by that? I don't know. Maybe people are. But when you start to talk about something like increasing a commission rate, putting real dollars on it, it's
amazing how people pay attention.
Yeah. I mean, we've certainly seen for years, just in this kind of association niche, one thing that people care about is their professional reputation, and just these kind of like serious trivia games, like quizzing doctors about their knowledge of their field, or quizzing even cable engineers was another example we saw. They take it seriously. If they can win like a serious quiz like that, they care about that. So that's one sort of niche where gamification seems to matter and to help.
Sure.
Okay. So I
take that test your World War II knowledge every time it shows up on.
There you go. And then I'm sure you share it, right? So that your peer group who cares about that will be impressed.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So
20 again.
Yeah, so we've finally got it. I'm kind of wrapping up here with the slope of enlightenment. So these are terms that are like post-hype, basically. So these are terms that are not being talked about as much, except by people who are actually using them for the most part. And we're just going to move through these quickly and then wrap up. So the first one, a term that really mattered a lot a few years ago, was M-learning or mobile learning. So there was a time when a lot of online learning technology didn't really work that well on a phone. It wasn't mobile friendly or mobile responsive. And I'd say what happened was that if a vendor couldn't solve that problem, they're mostly gone. Those technologies aren't used anymore. It was a must to solve the problem of mobile learning. So it's become something that is less frequently talked about recently, because it's just become very widely used. It's kind of just assumed that any learning technology is going to have the possibility of using it on the phone. But there's also the other side of mobile learning, where you're designing specifically for the phone, for the mobile experience. John, do you see any changes, recent trends in mobile learning? Do you hear people talking about M-learning much recently?
It actually it's something that is really important to any of our clients that are selecting learning systems. And I think I do agree with a lot of what you say, with that it's becoming more table stakes, that you just expect it to happen. But from my perspective, though, I look at a lot of systems, and you'd be surprised that they're still not all mobile responsive yet. Sometimes for learners, or in most cases for learners, but there's a lot of applications out there that still struggle administratively for any mobile device, or even for instructors or managers. So there's a lot of differentiation in the industry, and something buyers are concerned about getting pinched down the road. But the one aspect is to make sure that your content can run on any mobile device. To answer your question about the content, many strategic organizations are moving to a kind of a more vertical layout of content, so that you can replicate that concept of scrolling with your thumb like you would on other aspects of your mobile device or social media, versus going click, 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 and turning on pages like that. Yeah, so I see more of that.
Yes. So even some of the more popular SCORM authoring solutions have recently implemented that, like vertical layout. So you're not, usually SCORM was left to right. You're moving through a deck, previous and next buttons. That was the kind of classic layout. And then you see newer solutions where it's the infinite scroll. You just scroll downward through this package of content, and so that's driven by eLearning. So that's one example. Yeah, and I think that the micro learning trend was really in part driven by the success of mobile learning. So people were saying so many of our learners are now on mobile devices, and people don't engage with their mobile devices in exactly the same immersive way, maybe, as they do on larger screens. So that a lot of people thought micro learning made sense for that reason, that kind of quick engagement through mobile.
One last little point on this is that I have seen a trend or the swinging of the pendulum back towards mobile apps.
Yeah.
And so mobile apps are becoming more popular. Again, at first they were just stopgaps because their applications weren't mobilely responsive.
Right.
But now they have some real targeted applications with downloaded content or offline content, the ability to take videos and pictures of on the job things that you're doing and documentary and submit those assignments up, and also the ability to always have that always on concept so that you could get notifications and try to facilitate more of that day-to-day learning aspects, trying to bring the learning outside of the learning system. So there is a trend, organizations are using that, are using those more, and they're taking the APIs from learning systems and maybe populating training data into existing corporate apps that are already there.
Yeah, really interesting.
So instead of having just your own dedicated training, it's just a part of a broader app that maybe a company offers its clients, for example, or customers.
Cool. All right. So love to talk more about that, but I also want to talk about MOOCs, massive open online courses. So was really hyped. We're going back maybe 5 years or so. So when platforms like Coursera, Udacity, edX were new, there was a lot of hype even in like national media outlets about this change in education where courses were going to be online. They were going to have huge numbers of students enrolled, and they were going to be open and largely free. That hype, in the New York Times and places like that was so great that I'd say this trend started out in higher education, but then it kind of came to influence other parts of online education, like corporate education, association education, that kind of thing. John, where do you think we're at with MOOCs outside of higher ed nowadays?
Yeah, in the corporate world, it's really just a matter of securities and permission. So it's really just become a feature.
Yeah.
In that, do you allow it for people outside your organization? Do you say there's a limit of 10, or do you allow 1,000 people to attend? And can that event, be, one session, or could it be something that you extend over time? All of those things are just administrative permissions. And so, I don't see any buzz about it. Probably in the corporate world or the marketing world, they don't use the word MOOCs very often. They just call them marketing webinars.
Right.
It's basically providing content to your prospects to try to turn them into, immediately into customers, or, down the road into customers. And so the concept is still being used, just not the term so much.
Yep. All right. And simulation. I would just say really quick that simulation has been used out there for decades in e-learning. It showed up in our hype curve, I think, around the time that some solutions that made it cheaper to do these kind of branching choose your own adventure style simulations showed up, but now it's pretty much flat. I think it's just out there in use, and there's not much change in the hype. And then I wanted to close by talking about XAPI. So this was certainly a really hyped, SCORM replacement, this technology standard that would revolutionize online learning. John, do you think we're at the post-hype phase? Are we in the phase of application of XAPI now?
Well, we're certainly in the post-hype phase for sure. We're in varying levels of application. It's really one of the most useful but slowly adopted technologies that our industries has seen for some reason. But for the first time in the last couple of years, I'm seeing real applications of it. Organizations not just saying they want it in the selection process because they might need it 2 years down the road, but organizations are actually starting to use it. And I think one of the reasons, it goes back to the whole measurement and analytics and then AI is that you're able to now crunch that data in ways that makes it useful. Because before they're like, okay, great, we can track whether you read this book. Now what are we going to do with it? And it was nothing, for a long time. But now they could say, okay, well, anybody that maybe read this book and took this class, maybe there's a trend there that could lead to better learning. And that's something that we can analyze now that we couldn't before. So I think it'll continue to catch on for that reason.
Yeah, and I mean, it's become it's just classic hype curve. People have started to figure out, they've learned more about the technology, they've understood its uses. You're exactly right, John, that it's really driven by analytics. I mean, I think the people who designed XAPI were really thinking we're coming out of like the big data trend from 10 years ago or whenever you would pinpoint that, and they were starting to think about how big data might affect e-learning, and they were thinking we needed a standard for that unstructured data for XAPI. And Kate notes that she says, I hear Moodle, which is the most popular open source LMS. I hear Moodle is dropping SCORM support soon to go full XAPI. So yeah.
There you have it.
Yep. All right. So, and social learning, I think we're running out of time, but it looks like this trend has been around for years, and it's interesting that it's kind of starting to trend upward again now. We could sort of talk about that if we had any time, but we don't. So I want to, I want to say thank you so much for attending this and for all your great contributions. It was great to have so much engagement with our attendees in this one. John, thank you for coming in and offering your color commentary on all this.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, attendees, for listening.
Great to have you. So a couple closing remarks. We do have a short post-webinar survey should open up when you close the GoToWebinar. So we would appreciate it if you would take that. They really help us improve the quality of our webinars. And you'll also receive a follow-up email with a link to the webinar recording. And that's it. So thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.